October 14th, and we have the honor and the privilege to be able to study God's Word. And it will be coming from Mark chapter 7 this evening, verses 31 through 37. Last week we were in Matthew and Mark. We ended in Mark chapter 7, verse 30. And we are going to dive in now to see the continuation of Mark's account of the gospel during this time period. In this area that we are location-wise, Jesus is in Decapolis. There's areas in this section is called the 10 cities of Decapolis, or known as the 10 cities. And then if you do a quick Google search, you'll see this area is over by Jordan, Syria, in that kind of range in modern geography. If you're joining with us on YouTube, you are our honored guest. If you don't have a book, don't worry. We'll only be in Mark chapter 7, 31 through 37. We may do some cross-reference verses, but we'll primarily be there. And then in terms of our text, if you do have a book, we'll be on page 174. This page 174 is a new section in our book. This is Jesus's two trips to Decapolis, and talking about a stay in Galilee. So that's the structure that we have here in terms of location. Location matters when we're going through this book because our author is going through and breaking down these things by location as well as time period. So those things are important. Okay, let's start here, and we will read. It's a short reading. We'll just be in Mark chapter 7, 31 through 37. And then it's also a short reading in our text. So more on the discussion questions. There's 3 of them, but they're weighted. There's a lot in there. And we'll stay here. Hopefully we'll be able to get some understanding of the interaction of Jesus with the people in this area, as well as the miracle that he is about to perform. Good to remember just from last week's account, from verses 24 through 30, Jesus was interacting with a Gentile woman who was Greek by ethnicity, and she had a great quote of faith that Jesus had honored and respected by blessing her with her wish or her grant or her request, which was that her daughter would be healed of demon possession. And then verse 30 reiterated that when the lady had came back to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed. We pick right up in verse 31. And again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up on heaven, he sighed and said to them, Ephphatha, that is, be open. Immediately his ears were open, and the impediment of his tongue was loosened, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one, but that the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. A couple of verses to highlight here that are important for us to highlight. If you are a person who marks things in your Bible, underline or highlights things, there's a couple of key verses here. Verse 32 gives us the interaction between Jesus and his audience, which is critical. It's that they sought Jesus out. We just came from a woman who was seeking Jesus out in verses 24 through 30, and a similar thing happened here. They brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment. So that's one thing to see there. They received their blessing as we just read through these few verses here. But the key thing to look at it is they were able to receive that blessing because they took that leap of faith and action by bringing the person to Jesus. That's one thing. Verse 34 is critical, and 33. It looks like there is a process to this physical healing that Jesus blessed this person with. The person had 2 issues. He was deaf, and he had an issue with his speech. He had an impediment with his speech. In verses 24 through 30, as well as in the account from Matthew, there's a begging or a pleading or a persistence between that individual, that lady from last week's lesson. And we see similar vernacular here in verse 32. These individuals begged him to put his hand on him. He took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Right. So that's interesting. We'll dive into that. And then he said something, which was be open. Immediately his ears were open. You're going to want to highlight that immediate. We'll get into that in a second. And the impediment of his tongue was loosened, and he spoke plainly. And then obviously for 36, if we look at that, it sounds like a contrast. So you're going to want to highlight that. We'll dive into this in a second, because after such a miraculous gift of two physical miracles, two healings in one person, Jesus commanded them that they should tell no one. So you're going to want to underline command. Interesting verbiage there. But the more he commanded them, this is interesting, right? The more that he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. The more they commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So that is the breakdown that we have there. Okay, let's look at this, just three quick paragraphs on page 174. On page 174, Jesus left the area of Tyre and Sidon and came to the region of Decapolis, Mark 7:31, which lay east and south of the Sea of Galilee. Once he was there, people brought him a deaf man who could hardly talk. The people begged Jesus to place his hand on him, on the man, in order to heal him, Mark 7:32. In response, Jesus took the deaf man aside away from the crowd, interesting, and put his finger in the man's ear, interesting. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue, also interesting, Mark 7:33. Jesus looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh, interesting, said to the deaf man, right? Why is he speaking to the deaf man? Ephath, be open. And that, at that, the man's ears were open. His tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly, Mark 7:35. Following this, Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone. However, the more he told them not to tell, the more they kept telling people about it, Mark 7:36. The people from the Decapolis were overwhelmed with amazement when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing. They said, he has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute speak. The reason why I kept saying interesting here in this second paragraph from our page 174 is we'll start from the bottom and work our way back, that Jesus looked up to heaven, upward, then took a sigh and said to the deaf man, be open. The man is deaf. So if I didn't know the end of the story, or if I didn't realize or believe Jesus's powers and ability, this would seem strange. Also, this physical interaction between Jesus and this man would also seem strange visually to me. He took the deaf man aside, right? Not in the group or in the midst, away from the crowd. He put his finger in the guy's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. And then the miracle is profound, because inside of the miracle, we have something amazing happening, because the ears were open and his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. And then, obviously, since I flagged this before, this is something that is baffling to many readers. Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone. The biggest thing that stands out to me is not so much that he ordered them not to, because we had already seen him throughout this point in our study of the gospel of Jesus telling other individuals after healings not to tell anyone about the healing. But this next part, that the more he told them not to tell, the people actually didn't listen to him. Instead, the more that he kept telling them not to tell, the more they kept telling people about it anyway. And then they went on and proclaimed, he has done everything well. You're gonna want to highlight everything. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So short reading, but very powerful in its message, jam-packed in what is available for us to unpack. So we'll dive into this now and see what we have to discuss from this. Question 1 has multiple questions. So even though there's only 3 questions this week, each question has a lot of questions, a lot of sub-questions. So we'll dive into this. 3-parter here. Did there seem to be any type of illness that Jesus could not heal? Because the people are amazed at what he's doing. So this is actually a worthy question. Does it seem to you like there's any illness that he could not heal? And just try to limit your knowledge and understanding to at this point, right? Try to limit your knowledge and understanding only to this moment in time, only to this point. Second part is just expounding upon that. What do you think about that? Now, again, try to keep that just limited to here, just to think about it from this point of view. And then what do you conclude about Jesus from your answer, right? Did there seem to be any type of illness that Jesus could not heal? What do you think? What do you conclude about Jesus from your answer, right? This is a personal question. Put yourself in this time period, right? When I say that, keep in mind, you may not be following Jesus in your thought process, right? So if you heard of him, hearing and seeing is different. So you heard he can do a lot of wonderful things. Maybe some people have embellished those things. Maybe some people denounce those things. You just happen to be in this realm and you witness for yourself, right? So think about it from that way. Don't think about it from the standpoint of you are a follower of him, one of the disciples following him around up until this point. So let's try to limit our knowledge or understanding just to that locality. We're in Decapolis. We heard about Jesus, yes, but we may not have experienced him to the extent of us studying from his birth so many months back into right now. And then think about, if that's the case, if we can put ourselves in that mindset, what do you conclude about Jesus from that answer, right? What do you glean from that, right? What do you get from Jesus's abilities, right? Let's keep it physical and not spiritual, although I would say that's very difficult. But let's keep it physical and not spiritual in this part. Just from looking at what Jesus is able to do, how amazing that is. Let's say we didn't know all the things he could do. So we heard about some things, okay, but we didn't fully see. Well, now we see. We're one of the people here. We're amazed at his physical blessings, right? They were astonished, verse 37, beyond measure, right? Completely out of their mind, ecstatic. He has done all things well. And why? Verse 36, that they should tell no one, but the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it, right? It's just exuding out of them. They can't even comprehend. And the author of our book says that people were overwhelmed with amazement when they saw the mute speaking, the cripple made well, the lame walking, the blind seeing. These are physical blessings. So what do you think? Did there seem to be, not saying there is, did there seem to be any illness that Jesus could not heal? What do you conclude about Jesus from your perspective about that? Does there seem to be any illness, right? I don't think about illness in terms of Jesus's ministry that much. I have to be honest. So like when illness to me is a modern concept. So I don't think of that. I think of blindness. I think of cripple. I think of casting out demons, just me personally. But illness in my mind, modern time, would be cancer, diabetes, and things like that. So I can only imagine how amazed people were, because if Jesus was healing people of these illnesses that are in my mind, I would be just as ecstatic as they are. And of course, when you look at somebody blind or who can't speak or who can't walk, that's such a visual illness. To see that and witness that firsthand had to be amazing. But what do you think about illness? This is why I like this question, because me personally, when I think of the miracles that Jesus were doing in this time period, Had I been one of the people in the audience, I can't say to you that I would have assumed because he did A, he can do B. Meaning, just because I heard Jesus could walk on water doesn't mean I, Ellis, would have assumed that he could have done this. Like, I know some of us, our faith is that we just see, and some of our comments are like, oh, I would have already realized that. I would not. I don't make that correlation. Just because someone could do something once, I wouldn't even assume that they can do it multiple times. So that's where my mind would be. That's why I'm always amazed at the type of miracles that Jesus is actually doing here, because they're physical in nature. And yes, we have read different scriptures that talks about him going into towns and healing everybody, but that could have been embellished, right? I think more of like a Thomas, where, I mean, I may have heard some of these things, but I don't know if they're true or not. So when I see him and I see this, people going to him with somebody who's physically sick, my response would have been much like this crowd of people. I wouldn't have been able to contain that, number one. And I would have been genuinely amazed, even if someone came over and said, hey, didn't you hear he healed this or did that or that? I still would have been amazed, because I would not have made the assumption that just because he was able to feed 5,000, or just because he was able to uh, raise someone from the dead, that he would do this. So that's why, to me, it still would be profound. Every one of these miracles he does in these towns, if I was in the audience and limited to that location, me personally, I still would have been amazed, because I don't make it wouldn't have occurred to me that he would have been able to do all these things. I don't get that knowledge and understanding and faith until I look at the Bible in its totality. But if I just looked at it as a snapshot, me personally, I would not have assumed that he is able to do all of these things. And as we keep going on throughout this section of our book, you're going to see that the apostles have that too, because after he feeds the 4,000, they go off, and the apostles didn't bring bread on this little short journey. And Jesus is going to warn them in our chapter 64, Mark chapter 8, to not be entertaining the leaven of the Pharisees. And the apostles are going to think in their mind, oh, they assume he's talking because they forgot to bring bread. And Jesus is going to say, why are you thinking I'm talking about bread? See, even they are not fully in line with what he's doing in front of them on a regular basis, because he's doing so much. It's going to be hard for you to digest this in real time. And I think that's also something that I personally look at as a blessing, to be able to be born in this dispensation and see the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, because I don't know how strong my faith would be in real time, because snapshot is not enough for me. That's me personally. I think that's why Jesus was saying, blessed are those that are going to believe and not see, because even though they're not going to see me physically, they're going to see the full picture. Even though you see me physically, because you're walking and talking in the time period in which the word became flesh, you're not going to see completely. And that's going to be a hindrance to some, and some are going to walk away because they're going to not be able to digest some of the teachings Jesus are going to be saying in snapshots. But for us, hopefully it makes more sense when you look at the whole story. So anyone have any comments on this? Illnesses, right? Diseases in a physical sense, not from a spiritual sense, not from the teachings. Just, are you amazed at what he is able to do in the medical sense? Only limiting it to illnesses. Does it seem like there's any illness that he could not heal, or if you want to replace could not with would not heal? Does it seem like there's anything physically off limits here for Jesus? Obviously, we're talking about Jesus. Anything that seems to be physically off the table, just from your viewpoint? Yes, Brother Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know. I'm not sure. right? Because if hearing is one thing, like if I heard Jesus is healing people, and again, just putting myself in the mind of being there. So if I'm in that time and I hear about Jesus, you know, um, I don't know, I'm kind of skeptical about things, about people doing things, and what you hear about them doing. But if I'm seeing Jesus, you know, like I know people who are blind or crippled, you know what I'm saying, or in a wheelchair or, have some kind of physical ailment. And if I see someone like change that ailment where now the person's walking or can see, you know, I think that that's like a phenomenon, like, you know what I mean? So if I see that myself, it would have me question like, wow, is there anything that he can't do? But my skepticism would lead me to say like, at that point, I believe he hasn't raised Lazarus from the dead. So I'm like, he probably can't bring anybody back from the dead, or, just something spectacular that I haven't actually seen him do. So, I mean, it's kind of difficult to like, you know, think retroactively about it, you know what I mean? But I would say that seeing, even with seeing it, I would probably still be a bit skeptical about what he could actually fully do.
Yeah, see, I would be the exact same way. Because, like, in this time, if we put ourselves in this time, it's not like everyone was pro Jesus. So, like, what if somebody would have been talking to me and Kirk different from the rest of you that were against Jesus? So they would have been persuading us that he was bad. Remember, there's people seeking to kill him. They're saying that he's blaspheming against God. So maybe we heard that. So I would be the same way. Like, all right, the same guy, the Pharisees who are the leaders, they're saying that he's wrong to the point where they should kill them. And you telling me he walked on water. See, like it would be hard to be like, okay, I mean, you do sound excited, but there's a lot of evidence against him if I'm only hearing what people are saying about him, right? Like it's in a couple of lessons when we keep progressing here, Jesus is going to ask, what are people saying about me? And they're saying, oh, some people saying this, some people saying that. And he said, but what do you say about me? Right? That's the point, because a lot is being said about Jesus. Right. So like this is not the era of the internet. Right. So we could have just heard what we heard. Then we see this miracle. Right. I also agree it would have impacted me two different ways. Had I known this person, it would impact me way different if I didn't know them, even if I knew of them, because it's just a different when something good happens to somebody, it just impacts you different than turning on the TV and hearing about something good. You may still smile because every good thing is a blessing, but when it's somebody it's just different. So for me, if I said I knew of this person, and this I knew for a fact, not a guess, not a summation, I knew for a fact that this person was deaf and could not speak properly. I knew that. And then I seen this person go away and come back. And the only thing that happened was this guy, Jesus, came to town. I couldn't hear from Jesus, even though he was the one who did the healing. Ellis, don't say anything. And I listened to him. I have to be honest, because it would have impacted me so profoundly. Now, had I not known this person, again, it would just be kind of hearsay, because I would think like, well, was he fully deaf? Did he just stutter? Like, how do you know? Like, and see, that's where the doubt starts to creep in. So I respect that comment, because if I put myself in this time period, I can't say, me personally, that I would have been overwhelmingly convinced by the evidence unless I followed with him, right? Me being my mindset, if I was somebody who's been following with him, then my faith would have been different. But if I just was in Decapolis and heard about this, all these other things before this Mark chapter 7 would not have impacted me personally. I would have just heard, here. But if I seen and I knew this person was really deaf, I knew this person really could not speak, and then Jesus healed them, you couldn't contain that for me. It would have impacted me way different. Sister Nadine.
So I think it kind of depends on where you are with this. So if you're the one that's sick and has heard about Jesus and you've been struggling with this illness or disability or something for a while, to you that might be hope. But if you're not, I know people who would go all over this country for the cure for cancer. If they just hear anybody say, I know people who do nearly everything on Facebook that tells you to drink this, mix this with that, and this and the other, because they're in pain and they want some hope, right? So if you're the one that's ill and looking for hope, like the lady who had the 12-year issue of blood, you'd be even willing to touch his garment because that is hope to you. Mm-hmm. But if you're not sick, or if whatever you're dealing with is something that you feel you can live with, you may be skeptical. But I really think that the more skeptical people were the politicians, and it's not because of what Jesus was doing. So those Pharisees and Sadducees, the members of the Sanhedrin, those people, for them it's politics. Yeah. And Jesus was threatening them. So no matter what Jesus did, they're always going to try to come up with some sort of way to trick him. Mm-hmm. Like many of you, I've been watching these. The TV this past few days, every now and then, seeing both sides trying to have this woman say something that would be newsworthy. Mm-hmm. That's the Pharisee and Sadducees, right? That's how it would be. But the common man, if I hear that, hey, John Jones tell me that, hey, that's what happened down there, I'm going to run down there and see if that can happen to me too. Or I'm going to take my kid or my relative to see if that could happen to. I really think it really depends on where you are. That you would depend on how you act, right? And so is there a type of illness that Jesus could not heal? For us, looking, through this Bible study for all these years, we know that there is none that he can't heal. We know physically and spiritually he could heal all of those, as long as, people gave themselves access to him. Jesus didn't even need to have access to the sick person. Mm-hmm. We've watched that or read that and we have discussed all of that. But the question that I wanted to go into is, what do you conclude about Jesus from this answer? I mean, in the last week we've been talking about, last Sunday we talked about, the praises and the Psalms, and one of them was, we have been fearfully and beautifully made. And this was by God, and Jesus was there. And if he can make us, there's nothing that we can go through that he can't heal, that he can't fix.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, let's just start at the last and go to the beginning. If you think about that for a second, just illnesses, right? The things that are in our lifetime, the things that humanity struggles with now. Some of those things overlap, right? Deaf, blind, not able to walk, not able to speak. Some of these things are still flowing, right? But just illnesses, sickness, right? Like sickness. Sometimes some people just get sick and the doctors say, we don't know what's wrong. Like you're praying, you're hoping, like the medical community, the treatment isn't doing anything. You're just thinking the person is just sick. They're not well. To think that Jesus could just, because Ellis asked, right? Because like sometimes he healed just because someone else asked. Like, I know the person is too sick to get them to you. So could you heal them, please? Like just asking. So when Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount at the beginning was talking about asking, seeking, and knocking, I think of, and this is going to get us to question 2 in a second. I think of this because The people brought this person to Jesus and then they begged him. So like when Sister Nadine was talking, even though she was talking about the physical, like saying like these things were physical, and if you put yourself in his realm or someone you knew put yourself in his physical realm, he would heal. It sounds like I would have to be an active participant in my blessing. And then she talked about, the people who are threatened from a power standpoint, obviously they wouldn't be for him because they're going to denounce the miracles because all they can see is their losing of the grip of power. So that reminded me from a spiritual standpoint of 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. The message of the cross, that same message is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. That same miracle is a stumbling block to some, but a blessing and a faith convincer to others. That same proclamation of Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, brought death to Christ, but it brings life to us through the watery graves of baptism. Like there's a lot of things in the spiritual that the same exact thing gives two outcomes, a lot. And Jesus spoke about this, that this same message is going to bring division in the home, let alone in the world. In the home, he said, because people are going to hear, but receive it totally different, the same message. And when you start talking about, okay, what are some of those things that are differentiators? It would be this 1 Corinthians from a spiritual sense. Where's your mindset? What are you seeking? What are you looking for? Right? What are you hoping for? But it also in the physical sense is imagine being sick and not going to see Jesus in this time period. Like it would be like everyone you knew hit the lotto and then the next day they hit and the next day and you saying to yourself, well, I mean, what's the odds of hitting 4 days? So I'm not going to go buy a ticket. And you just refuse to buy a ticket and every person you know around you is hitting. Like imagine being in these areas and let's say you're on the fence, like I said I was, and then this person getting healed, and then that person and somebody who wasn't even there, another person went and got the person healed. How many healings would you need to hear before, if you had an illness, you would get up? Sister Nadine saying some people just need all the way at water to wine. They already would have been up and running if it impacted them or their loved one. Definitely agree with that, because if you were sick, especially the woman who said that she exhausted all her financial resources trying to get well. So she was out of options. When your back is against the wall, you liable to try or do anything, even things that in another situation you may not try or do. So if I put myself in that mindset of hope versus despair, hope should win. But some people, right, is amazing as that sound, you have to understand that some people heard this, some people seen this, and still were on the fence. Like that's what's so profound to me about Jesus's interaction with the people he walked and talked among these 33 and a half years. Not just the deity and those sort of things, but from the people's point of view. That some people seen what we're reading and experienced it and weren't convinced. That's why I'm not at all or confused when Jesus said broad is the way, because if people seen, like Brother Kirk mentioned Lazarus in some several chapters, right? If people seen that and knew Lazarus, it said Lazarus died and then he was alive and still was not convinced, it's not out the realm of possibility for me to think that people would not believe just because the Bible says, because people didn't believe that this guy was deaf and could hear. I can see why people would be like, I mean, I hear what you all are saying. This is a nice book, has a couple of good quotes that old people say, but I'm not convinced that I should change my life because of it. It puts things into perspective. If people could see physical miracles and experience them and not be fully persuaded, the words, right? The actual word, capital W, the light, it was shining in the darkness, but what does John say? It just, the darkness rather do dark. So it didn't experience it the same way. So it had no desire to come into the light and be changed. It had no desire to be changed. And I think that is a difference between the experiences. Because when Jesus talks to that crowd about eating of his flesh and drinking of his blood, and people were saying, this is a hard saying, people, they liked the miracles, they loved the experience that they were getting. But once Jesus started talking about changing who you are, some people weren't fully convinced, right? And that is where I try to put my mind when I'm in a Bible study. I have to remember that the Bible is asking someone to change who they are. For some people, that's hard to digest, because sometimes to change, I have to admit that I'm wrong, or a loved one was wrong or misled me. So I don't discount when people struggle with faith, even at the beginning of their faith, because they may not think about eternal life or think about the miracles. Their mind may just hear the change part, where me, I would be so excited in teaching them and telling them about all these wonderful things that God has in store for them, that he made them in his own image and all these things. But while I'm saying that, the person is digesting, but I like the way I am. It sounds like this Bible is looking for me to change my behavior. And see, that's where it's going to be a divider, double-edged sword. And some of that, right? If I surmise again, just in this setting, some of that could be going through my mind as a person. If I think with the side of my brain that may not be fully convinced, that may be why I wouldn't be fully convinced, because it would just sound so fantastic to me. But then I would think, look, why do I have to change who I am or change the way I live and those sort of things? And then from that physical standpoint, on the flip side, if I or a loved one was going through those physical things, what would I do or would not do? That's really what I have to ask myself from what Sister Nadine was saying at the beginning. What would I not do to be made well? Like, I would hope that I would do anything. Right? Like, I hope that I would do anything. Then I have to, even though the question is physical, think spiritual. Then what wouldn't you do, Ellis, to be spiritually made well? What wouldn't you do? But do I have that same fervor though? No, I have to be honest, right? Physically, if I'm sick, yes. But spiritually, nah, you guys giving me some good verses here or there, but I'm not always convinced. That's the problem, because I'm looking at it through the flesh and not through the spirit. Okay, Brother Kurt. Oh, you're still on mute. All right. Oh, there you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it me? I was disconnected for a little bit.
Sorry. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like the point about having the personal interaction with Jesus is like completely valid, right? And I think that's the beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? But that because when he was here in the physical, his interactions with humanity was limited. Now we have the ability to have that personal like experience with him where he brings healing to us, whether physical or mental, emotional, or whatever. But I think that ultimately, like Jesus during that time, again, thinking about it from like being in that perspective, he was like really limited because he was like physical. But now, because of the gospel and the word, which became flesh, we get to experience him personally, which is why, the whole point of salvation, I feel like. So yeah, I agree. I can see that lens as well.
And the thing is, like, with that comment, I just think even while he was saying that, to think that some people would hear that and still struggle with what he's saying. Whereas like my mind would be more convinced by what he's saying. Because like I would be more convinced from the experience than seeing Jesus once. My mind, the way my mind works. So it's like I would have been more convinced in Acts than in John, is what I'm saying. Because in Acts, it was all the apostles and people were being stoned to death and not denouncing. I would have been like, wow, like whatever is happening around here, like this is something, because look how people are acting, more so than just experiencing Jesus and not being able to follow him, because he's not allowing some people to follow him. That's why I keep bringing this back, so we're not lost in the comments that we're making. We're not saying like, oh, that the struggling would be following him. What if you weren't allowed to follow and you just interacted with Jesus in Mark 7:31 through 37? Is that enough for you to become a faithful person of God? Like for me, I would need more than that to change how I live every day. That's what I'm saying. Like I would have been amazed, yes, but not change the way I live. And see, that interaction is this question too, because the people, right, whoever these people were, and God bless these people, right, these were real friends. Whoever these people were, I don't know what the conversation was beforehand, because faith cometh by hearing, hearing by the word of God, but this individual is deaf. So the word is not printed yet. The word is visual. The word is a physical experience daily, right? I'm deaf. So I don't know what this person's faith is. I'm deaf and I can't confess anything because I can't speak. The people, his friends, the friends grabbed this individual, brought this individual to Jesus, right? Just think of coincidence, happenstance. Just think of it from that point of view. People in the world would just say, oh, you just happened to be, Jesus was interacting with the woman last week and he just happened to leave that area, and then you just happen to be in the right place, and then the friends just happen to have already heard about Jesus before, then they just happen to bring the person, but there's no guarantee you would have seen Jesus, and then it just happened to be at that right time that Jesus and the friends and the person just happened to be. Like, hear all those happenings. So when you think of it that way, my mind always is like, man, coincidence has never been deciding factor to me, because it just doesn't sound right to me that things just happen. Things are so amazing when I step back and look at the big picture. It makes more sense in my mind to think about a guiding force. So let's flip to spiritual sense, that this was for a purpose. This was for a reason. So these individuals were moved, let's say, by other accounts or other experiences. Wow, this sounds like evangelism. These individuals bring this person, and they didn't just bring them to Jesus and wait. They begged him. So I have to pause there and think about, I ask God a lot of things every day, but I can probably name the things that I've begged him for. So sometimes I have to ask myself, how bad do I want this blessing, or how much of a participant will I even be? Because these people were committed to this blessing. Okay, now they brought him, they brought the deaf, they brought the dumb to Jesus, wanting Jesus to heal this man by placing his hands on him. But Jesus did something different. We're in question 2. He did put his hands on him, but in a very different way. He spit, touched the man's tongue. Why? The man couldn't speak. In that way, he healed the man's ears and the man's tongue. The question is, did Jesus seem to have a set ritual for healing people? That's an interesting question, right? I purposely didn't use the phrase ritual earlier. Did Jesus have a set ritual for healing people? Did he heal in a specific way? As, for example, by putting his hands on people? What do you think? Did Jesus have a certain or a set ritual for healing people? Did he heal in a specific way, for example, by putting his hands on people? What do you think? Fritz Singers, I know you had your hand up earlier. So you don't feel like you have to answer question 2.
All right. Okay. So Jesus is capable of healing any way he chooses, because he's part of he's the source of all these people. I mean, he created everything, so he knows how. Like everything is the sound we're reading, how he knows how intricately we're put together, how we're knit together, how we're embroidered together. He knows all that, so he can choose a method that serves. So what's most interesting is that the last with the woman that the Canaanite woman, and here he's in pagan country. He went to the left and now he's to the right. In Decapolis as a pagan area, and to the left, the Tyre was a seaport of David and Solomon, and the Jews traipsed across that country to their seaport back and forth, and only threw scraps to the dogs, is what the lady was saying. That was the history. She was revealing that. But Jesus said he didn't come. He didn't come to. He only came to serve the Jews, and not the people of that country. And also here he is over in the pagan country of Decapolis doing a miracle over there. So I'm not sure what that's telling us, but Jesus is doing his miracles in those areas. But these two people, these groups of people know Jesus. They know about him. The Canaanite lady picked up the scraps of what was thrown out by the Jews as they traipsed across their country. And surely somebody here in the pagan country, the area, the Decapolis, they know about Jesus. They know the story, and they came to him with faith. But this is a concept you don't get that until Paul's time. That by faith you can be healed. The James and Peter and John were saying by you're converted by following the law, and before they knew about Paul and his faith and gospel. So these people have faith in the Jews and their and Jesus. I mean, and his ability, that word that's traveled far and wide, left and right, towards the Mediterranean and the other side of the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah, we could go, that could be a whole Bible study, just diving into this concept of we're seeing faith, right? But we don't really understand faith in a written form really until the New Testament past Acts. Jesus mentions these things, but we don't digest it in the way Jesus would have us to until after Acts. But you see faith sooner than that. And of course, we could go into the Old Testament, but just from a Christian standpoint of the completion, you're seeing what will be Christian faith, but you're seeing it before Christianity. Like, this is actual faith, because faith is action. So therefore, these people had to get up this day. They had to wake up. They had to stop what they were doing and make a time sacrifice first. Then they may had to stop doing some things that may have cost them something. They had to make an emotional sacrifice, because I'm taking what could be perceived to be as a risk, getting my hopes up and being disappointed. And then they had to make this physical sacrifice to get this person to wherever Jesus was, right? We don't know the distance or time, or was there people, whatever. And then you had to put pride aside and beg this man, right? There's a lot happening here with the people, right? The guy is going to be blessed, but the people, question two, there's a lot happening here. So when I see that, again, I'm just thought back to, they got what they asked. They begged. Mark specifically says that he would put his hands on this person, and Jesus did. They begged him to put his hands on him, and he did, right? And I think that is faith, because Jesus said, ask, seek, and knock, and these people did that. Okay, Brother Stanley.
Back in Mark chapter 5, when the demoniac man was healed, he wanted to go with Jesus, and Jesus told him no. He said, go home to your friends and tell them. And so in verse 20, it said, he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him and all marvel. So, okay, now the word is out in the Greek Gentile culture. So Jesus goes back there in verse 31, again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the regions of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. Now, Jesus is not in Jewish territory now. Again, he goes over, and Decapolis is known and called historically the 10 cities. So when people start bringing people to Jesus, this man had publicly published what Jesus had did for him, because Jesus told him to do that. He wanted to go with Jesus, but Jesus told him to stay there and tell everyone in your hometown what you've done. Not only did this guy do that, but it looked like he went on the circuit, because Decapolis is called the 10 cities. So when the people start bringing people to Jesus and begging Jesus, Jesus is getting a reception that he was not getting in his own area, his own hometown, from his own nation of people. So that must have made him feel good. Now imagine being restrained in that area because he had to make sure that the message stayed and start with Judaism. And I can imagine how that made him feel. And I get that feel in those comments from missionaries all the time. They do all this work in America, and when they go overseas and abroad in different places, it's like a welcome mat is laid out.
Yeah, I mean, this this is the effects of evangelism, effective evangelism, that time has gone by, and instead of the report dying down, it actually got amplified, right? Like, because of something that happened yesterday, not literally, but in a time past, look at the response in the today and in the future. That's really what is the Acts of the Apostle, right? And it's also the foundational inspiration for local church work, right? The things that you do now will echo in eternity, correct, but also in the finite. There's things that sacrifice you'll make now as individual congregations all over the world that people will be benefactors for and with, that you may never even see or experience because of that sacrifice. And that is from personal response, right? And that's something that Jesus knew would be effective, which is why he told his apostles that as well. You'll be able to do greater things, because when you go and tell people and then they go and tell people, it's going to be more effective because earlier what Brother Kirk was saying is our mindset is like the time is limited, and he's so polarizing. It's just not the same. It's not the same experience. I thank God that these people had even this much faith, because he was such a polarizing figure. People were arguing about him. It's not like us reading all the good things. People were fighting over if he was good or not. So like, I can see how people would be like, I don't know, the Pharisees are the ones in charge. They said he's evil, so he must be evil. I mean, they said he has a demon. What you want me to say? I'm just a carpenter. I'm just a merchant. I'm just a tax collector. They said, crucify him. What you want me to say? Don't do it? Like, I can just imagine how on the fence people would have been. But when you see these things happening post and experiencing and life changing, and you start being persuaded by the word, to me, the word becomes more important than the physical miracles at that point, because the word starts changing my personal life, and I can see the effects of that. And that's what kind of keeps happening. But even in sticking with question 2, before we move on to question 3, this ritual aspect, I think, is important, because they asked for something physically and they got something physically, right? They said, they begged him, put your hands on him, right? People were grabbing Jesus. Remember, we mentioned, Sister Nadine mentioned the lady who was losing blood. She got low. She just touched the hem. People were trying to touch him. This is something that is just human behavior, not just God in this sense, right? We can go through different parts of humanity, even to today, where people just want to touch someone famous, right? The touching. And then people have always wanted what they deem as a holy person to lay their hands on them, especially if they're sick, to pray for them. Some people literally want the hands, right? Not just the prayers, but can you come lay your hands on them, right? And that's something that we see that they're asking for that, right? They're not just asking for any kind of miracle. They're asking for a physical interaction with Jesus. And they got that. Jesus put his fingers in the person's ears, which was deaf, spit and touched the person's tongue. The creator, right? Once if I was this guy and I didn't know anything about this, but later I knew about Colossians, and Colossians starts saying everything that was made through him and for him and because of him, everything holds together, I would be like, I experienced that. I experienced that on the physical sense because he touched me. Right? Like we interacted on a creator level. This guy had that one-on-one experience that if you read Colossians and then come back to this story, I would be jealous now. I wish I could experience that in the physical because he experienced Colossians physically in his life. And I think that when you think about it that way, it's not limiting Jesus to a ritual because we seen last week he healed the woman's daughter without ever touching her. But it's different. It's a different experience. We know it's different because the woman said, he's so powerful. If I just touch his clothing, I'll be healed. So obviously people viewed the difference, right? So I think it's worth noting. Sister Nadine.
So I was just thinking, well, my Bible states that he touched the spitting and the touching of the ear was Jesus communicating with this guy through sign language. I don't know if that's true, right? But what I do know is that Jesus doesn't have a set way of doing things, and if he did, of healing, and if he did, maybe people will start thinking just like you remember Simon. The guy who wanted to purchase the gifts from the apostles, they saw that it was from the laying on of hands, and he's like, oh, let me do it, teach me how to do it too. But with Jesus, he didn't have to do any of that because the healing wasn't in the touching or even the talking. And that's what I think the writer here is getting to. It is from no particular set of actions that Jesus did. It was just because he was him. He could have thought it, and it would have been done. And that's what we saw when he told her, "Go home, it's done." He didn't even have to say that. It was a direction for her to know that it was done. So he doesn't need any kind of ritual. He didn't need any type of touching to do that. And if he did everything the same way all the time, people would think that it was some trick. Just like how in Moses's time they could throw down their staff also, and it would hurt the snakes. And Jesus was saying, no, I'm not about that. I am who I am.
Yeah, right. It's not about tricks. It's not about a sideshow. It's about truth, right? Truth over tricks. And if it's repetitive, someone's going to say, look, I caught it this time. I seen what you did. And I think that is, I agree, what the author of this book is trying to get us to put our mind towards, to leave the concept of ritualistic, right? Hopefully when we use that word, you start thinking of spiritual rituals that some people are tied up in, or superstitions. And think about it from a God standpoint, a God of everything. There is no ritual needed there, right? Ritualistics or superstition is going from a lower concept. That's in the physical. Things that I hope I keep doing the same thing. I keep wearing my team's jersey, and every time I wear it, they win. When I don't wear it, they lose, right? That's in the physical. God is outside of superstition. He's outside of repetitive ritualistic things. God says, behold, I make all things new. So the experience is different. And I think that this was a new experience. As readers, this is new from what we've been studying from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John up until this point. This is a new experience. This healing process, the actions of this process is new. Okay, question 3. Jesus did not want the people in Decapolis, which we're reminded of the young person, the man who had the demon possessed in the tombs area, had a different reaction, right? And we were reminded of the woman at the well. Jesus did not want the people in Decapolis to tell others that he had healed the deaf and dumb man. Why did he not want them to tell others? What do you think? So why do you think? Let's just surmise here. This sounds like something you would tell everybody. So why would you not want, because Brother Stanley read earlier of a time where somebody did tell someone in this same vicinity, and the blessing is that these people were persuaded too. So then why now the blessing of that blessing will be muzzled? Don't say anything. Sister Karen?
Yes, because Jesus' time was not come as yet, was not fulfilled as yet. Jesus, don't forget that Jesus came on this earth to fulfill a specific purpose, and his purpose was not fulfilled as yet. And he knows that if people found out that he was healing and doing all these miracles, they would be more adamant about killing him and pursuing him, and then he would not be able to do the work that his father, God, sent him to do before his death. So basically, he knew that he had to do everything according to the plan because what God's will had to be done.
And I think when we think of that, this may be a little bit high level, but when we think of that, also think that that restriction, right? When Jesus said, no one takes my life, I lay it down. I have the power to lay it down. I take it back. I have the power to raise it back. That power I get from my Father. That he didn't make a mockery of the law. He didn't make a mockery of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the lawyers, right? He could have made a mockery. He could have left Jerusalem, stayed in this Gentile region, and convinced and persuaded all of them. That would have made a mockery, because what people would have said is, this guy is Jewish and he's with us. That would have made a mockery. Think about it from that other side, because he is going to allow them to put hands on him violently. Every time I get to that part of the story and think the same Jesus who moved through their midst, remember the John when he said, I am, he moved through their midst miraculously. They couldn't even see him. Remember early on when we were looking at it and they wanted to throw Jesus off the cliff and he just moved through their midst. He's going to stop moving through their midst miraculously at one point and allow them to physically grab him. And not just anyone, the religious leaders of the law. That is a big deal. Not just anybody he's going to let grab him. The people who are the high priests of the law. That is where we're moving to. So he is maneuvering and being a creator at this point, right? Last week, this week, this is creator mode, right? This is a creator is a creator. So therefore, I have another flock, we know from his scripture, and I need to graft those two flocks together. Then there'll be no division. Okay, as Bible readers, we know what he's talking about from the Acts of the Apostles, and us sitting here are benefactors of that. But just think about it in that time period, though, because the reception was very different. He could have stayed and maneuvered in this area and created a stronghold of supporters, people that would be willing to die for him or kill for him, people that would be willing to violently make him a leader, right? A takeover. Think about it from that point of view. So if that was something as well, think, okay, these people, as hard as it may sound, they're not ready yet, but they will be ready. So when I send my apostles back to this area, then they'll be ready to receive it in the way that I would have them to receive it. If I stay in the realm of the physical world now, people won't receive it the way I intend them to receive it. Sometimes I look at it that way, that everything is in due time. Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, didn't want them to receive him out of order. They were blessed to see him and experience him, right? But they had to receive him in an order. Sister Karen is talking about a future order. That order is after his death, burial, and resurrection, not before. And it's hard for me to understand that. But when I look at it from God's point of view, who's outside of time, then it makes more sense. If I look at it as Ella's point of view, I'm in time, it makes no sense, right? Like, but outside of time, oh, this makes a lot of sense, because if I knew my ending at my beginning, then yes, I would maneuver differently through time. And I think that that's something we have to grab hold of too, as well, of looking at these kind of questions. Now we got to step back and look at the whole picture to really answer these type of questions, because Jesus is outside of time. And therefore, we talked about this so many weeks ago with Jesus and his brothers saying, your time is all the time because you're from down here. Like, I work on godly time. So we maneuver differently. This action is on God's time, right? At some moments, it's time. And other moments is not. Ecclesiastes talks about that, right? Jesus is saying at this moment, it's not time. But the interesting thing is, do the people listen to him? And I think that that's the thing that we really got to look at it. Do the people listen to him? So that I'll end with those. Anyone have any comments on that part? That part is not explicitly in the text here from our class. But what do you feel about that? Because the people, do they listen? Do they obey him? I guess is what I'm asking. I hear what Sister Karen is saying. I believe it. I experienced it. Then I think, did they listen to what Sister Karen said?
How come my picture?
And that's the thing. Did they hear it? What do we think? Did they hear it? Did they digest it? Did they obey it? Right? Even for me, it's hard to think of it that way because they didn't listen to him. So it's like every time I think of Jesus, I think of people doing what he said to do. These people didn't do what he said to do. I have to come to grips with that, right? He said, don't tell people. And the more he kept saying, don't do it, the more they did the opposite and kept telling people. Anyone have any thoughts on that? We'll close with that. Anyone have any thoughts to that concept? Anybody want to be bold enough to give their opinion on that?
What is your question?
The question is, what is our thought on them not listening, right? He said, don't tell anyone, but they did tell people. And he kept telling them, don't tell anyone. And the more he kept saying, don't tell anyone, they kept telling people, right? How does that sit with us? What's our opinion? How do we feel about that?
I don't think they could have controlled themselves. I mean, this fantastic thing just happened to me, and I need to tell the whole world because I've realized that God is God. God is all powerful. I don't think anyone told in a malicious way. I think they were just praising God and they were just so happy that they were healed. They don't care how they were healed. They don't care who he is. All they know is that they're healed. So I think they just didn't listen because they just want to share the good news. Isn't that what we do today? Something good happens, we call the whole world, we shout it from the mountaintops. This just happened. Oh my God, this just happened to me. So I think it's just human nature that they just couldn't help themselves.
Yeah, I think of Jeremiah saying that the fire is caught up in his bones. I think of this, verse 37. They were astonished beyond measure. He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. Sister Donna?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this was such an exciting, more than exciting, beyond exciting moment just to see the miraculous thing, because it was not just doing something. It clearly was miraculous. And it's amazing how you want to shout and tell those things. And when things do happen to us, as Karen said, you want to tell everybody, right, what's happening. But it's almost, we do almost the opposite, because when we talk about the good news of Jesus Christ and salvation and Jesus wanting us to tell people about him and salvation and what he can do for them, we shy away from that. Now that's the best news you could ever get beyond a physical blessing. This is in the spiritual realm, and we keep that to ourselves and we don't share as openly. Like, you're not, you may get excited when you're first baptized and you may share with a few people, but you're not running around like these people when they were able to see a physical change in someone's physical body. So I just think it's amazing that contrast of what we do when we see something in the physical versus what Jesus said not to tell, and we're telling everybody. Then Jesus tell us to tell, and then that we kind of hold back. Just an
we're not
interesting
telling.
contrast.
Yeah. He tells us to tell now and we're not telling.
We're not telling.
Right. So that's it. I have to look in the mirror at that, right? I have to hear that comment and look in the mirror to say, am I excited as these individuals in the telling when I'm being told to tell? I'm being told to spread that good news. Sister Nadine?
Well, I think one of the other reasons why Jesus told them not to tell is because he knew that all that they would care about is getting their physical bodies fixed. And everybody is going to tell naturally when something good has happened, but that becomes the main thing and not the spiritual lessons that Jesus is trying to teach. And so I think maybe that's one of the reasons, not just that his time hasn't come, we know that it hadn't, but also because people were going to inundate him with just the physical healing and not pay attention to the spiritual teachings.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to keep going. Maybe about I think chapter 66 and 67 in our book, but just in that time period, that's going to happen where Jesus is going to turn around to his audience and start asking them some questions. The audience being those disciples who are following him, right? Like it's going to keep happening throughout his ministry. And some people are going to fall away because all they're looking for is this, right? There's going to be a time period where they're going to be pursuing him, asking for signs, and Jesus is going to literally say, how come this generation keep asking for signs? Like it's going to come a time period where what Sister Nadine is going to be saying is going to be happening in our future Bible studies when we're moving through order, right? So that matters is what Jesus knows the hearts and the minds. We don't. So that's a handicap that we have that Jesus doesn't have. So therefore, there must be a reason for him to say, don't do something, obviously, right? Time hasn't come and those sort of things. And obviously, if he knows the hearts and the mind, there must be a reason. When we tie those things together, I have to come back to think about me. There must be a reason he's telling me to tell. There must be a reason he's telling me to go. There must be a reason, like he's giving me these instructions under grace, under the new covenant, but am I adhering to those instructions? And those are the things that we have to wrestle with. Okay, good discussion this evening. If you want to read ahead, there's two passages we'll be in next week, Matthew 15, 29 through 39, and Mark chapter 8, 1 through 10. If you have any prayer requests, please add them into Zoom or YouTube now. I want to thank all of our friends, family, and visitors for joining us on YouTube and sharing in this Bible study with us. We pray all be made well in your life.